The massive Dominion flagship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star made of silver and light, its hull spanning 3 kilometers from end to end and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust if the crew chose to fire them. Humanity watched with a mixture of hope and fear as the vessel settled into a hovering position above the Atlantic Ocean, its anti-gravity generators creating ripples in the water below that could be seen from space. This was its first contact with an advanced alien civilization, or rather, first contact with 12 alien civilizations that had banded together to form the Galactic Dominion. The diplomats came first. Tall beings from a dozen different worlds, some humanoid and some decidedly not, all wearing translation devices that converted their varied languages to something humans could understand. They brought gifts of technology and knowledge, medical advances that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries, power generation systems that could solve the energy crisis overnight, and agricultural techniques that could end world hunger in a generation. But they also brought evaluators. War Marshal Kethrax of the Valorian Empire stood 8 feet tall, his body a perfect fusion of biological enhancement and cybernetic augmentation that made him look like a warrior god from ancient mythology. His skin had a metallic sheen. His eyes glowed with an amber light that came from internal processors linked directly to his brain, and his movements carried that precise efficiency of someone who had trained for combat for over a century. He commanded the Dominion's 7th Battle Fleet and had been chosen to assess Earth's military capabilities to determine what role humanity might play in the galactic community. The assessment began at Fort Bragg, where the United States military put on their most impressive display. Paratroopers dropped from aircraft in perfect formations. Their parachutes, blooming like flowers against the blue sky, tanks rumbled across training grounds, firing their main cannons at targets that erupted in spectacular explosions. Infantry units demonstrated room-clearing techniques, hostage rescue scenarios, and urban warfare tactics. The human generals watched with pride as their soldiers performed flawless. Lycothrax watched with barely concealed contempt as aide. A smaller Valorian named Drex, who served as his tactical analyst, recorded everything with instruments far more sophisticated than any camera. Earth possessed kinetic projectile weapons. Drex muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. They still use gunpowder to propel metal slugs at each other, Kethrax replied, shaking his massive head. And their soldiers completely and augmented. No cybernetic enhancements, no genetic optimization, not even basic neural implants. The demonstration continued at Naval Station Norfolk, where aircraft carriers and destroyers conducted exercises that the human admirals considered cutting-edge naval warfare. Kethrax observed cruise missiles being launched, jets taking off from carrier decks, and submarines diving beneath the waves. Primitive fusion reactors, outdated radar systems, and vessels that would be destroyed in seconds by even our oldest military hardware. He said to Drex, "Should I note that in the report, War Marshal?" "Note everything." Kethrax commanded. The Dominion Council needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. The final demonstration took place at Edwards Air Force Base, where Earth's most advanced aircraft screamed through the sky at speeds that broke the sound. Harrier stealth bombers demonstrated their ability to evade radar detection. Fighter jets engaged in mock dogfights that pulled G-forces no unaugmented humans should be able to survive. An experimental spacecraft reached the edge of the atmosphere for the first time. Kethrax seemed mildly impressed. Their pilots have courage. He admitted to fly in such fragile craft without proper inertial dampening or energy shields requires a certain bravery or stupidity. Drex suggested. Therax's laughter boomed across the tarmac like thunder. Perhaps you're right. The human military officials tried to engage Kethrax in discussions about tactics and strategy, hoping to demonstrate that what Earth lacked in technology, they made up for in tactical innovation and warrior spirit. General Marcus Webb, a decorated veteran with 40 years of service, explained the concept of combined arms warfare, how different military branches work together to achieve objectives. Thrax listened politely, but his expression never changed from one of patient indulgence. Like an adult listening to a child explain their imaginary friend, "Your tactics are adequate for fighting others at your technological level," Kethrax said, when Webb finished. but in galactic warfare. Such primitive approaches are less than useless. Their liabilities. Webb's jaw clenched, but he maintained his composure. With respect, War Marshal, we've survived and thrived through some of the most brutal conflicts imaginable. Against yourselves, Kethrax interrupted. You've fought wars against other humans using human weapons and human tactics. You've never faced an enemy that can shield against your projectiles, that can move faster than your eyes can track, that can strike from orbit before you even know they're there. The general had no response to that 3 weeks after the assessment began. Kethrax submitted his report to the Dominion Council. The document was 40,000 words long and filled with technical analysis, strategic evaluations, and tactical assessments. The conclusion was brief and devastating. Humanity's military capabilities are roughly equivalent to where the Dominion was 12,000 years ago. Kethrax wrote, their soldiers are brave, but hopelessly outmatched by any serious galactic threat. They lack basic augmentation, rely on kinetic weapons that are ineffective against modern shielding, and their tactics assume enemies who fight at similar technological levels. Recommendation: accept Earth as a provisional member of the Dominion, but exclude humans from any military roles for their own protection. Sign them to resource extraction, agricultural support, and cultural exchange programs where their primitive skill sets can be useful without putting them in danger they cannot handle. The report circulated among the Dominion Council members, 12 representatives from 12 different species who governed the Alliance. Some felt Kethrax was being too harsh, that humans deserved a chance to prove themselves. Others agreed completely, arguing that bringing primitive warriors into galactic conflicts would be cruel and pointless in the end. The council voted 8-4 in favor of Kethrax's recommendations. The human diplomats received the news during a formal ceremony aboard the Dominion. Flagship Ambassador David Chen stood before the council, trying to maintain his dignity as they explained that Earth would be welcomed into the Dominion family, but that human military personnel would not be permitted to serve in combat roles. We mean no disrespect, Council Speaker Malthus said, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. But sending your soldiers into galactic warfare would be equivalent to sending children armed with sticks to fight armored warriors. We cannot in good conscience allow such a massacre. Chen swallowed his pride and accepted the terms. The Earth needed what the Dominion offered too desperately to refuse over. Wounded ego. But as he listened to the translated recording of Kethrax's assessment, the War Marshal's voice calling humanity's finest warriors soft-bodied primitives playing at war, Chen felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Back on Earth, the recordings reached the Intelligence Services Colonel Sarah Mitchell of MI6 listened to Kethrax's mocking assessment 3 times, her expression growing more thoughtful with each replace. She sat in her office at Vauxhall Cross, the Thames visible through her window, and considered the situation carefully. The Dominion had seen conventional military forces, infantry, armor, naval vessels, and air power. They had witnessed mass formations and overwhelming firepower, but they hadn't seen everything Earth had to offer. They hadn't seen the soldiers who operated in the shadows, who won wars before the enemy knew a war had begun, who turned disadvantages into advantages through skill and cunning. Mitchell picked up her secure phone and dialed a number only a handful of people in the British government knew existed. This is Mitchell, she said. When the line connected, I need to speak with the Director of Special Forces. We may have an opportunity to change some minds about human capabilities. On the other end of the line, there was a pause. Then a voice responded with quiet interest. I'm listening. 6 months passed since Earth joined the Dominion as a provisional member, and humanity had settled into its assigned role with quiet resignation. Human engineers worked on resource extraction projects across a dozen worlds. Human agricultural experts helped terraform barren planets into farmland. And human cultural ambassadors shared Earth's art and music with species that found it charmingly primitive. But no human war, military uniform in Dominion service that changed on a cold morning when the emergency beacon from Kragath 7 reached Dominion Command. The message was brief and terrifying. Research facility hidden in the planet's mountain ranges had been infiltrated. By the Zephyl Swarm 4 species unfamiliar with galactic politics, the Zephyl were the nightmare that kept Dominion worlds safe at night. The boogeyman parents invoked to scare children into behaving. They were insectoid creatures that operated with hive mind efficiency, capable of infiltrating the most secure facilities and adapting to any defense with frightening speed. They didn't conquer worlds, they infiltrated them, learned from them, and then destroyed them from within the facility. On Kraggett 7 wasn't just any research station, it housed the quantum encryption matrix, a device that generated the rotating cipher keys for every secure communication in the Dominion military network. If the Zephyl captured it, they could intercept orders, redirect fleets, and create chaos across thousands of worlds. War Marshal Cathrax received the alert while inspecting his flagship's new weapons array. He immediately diverted 3 battalions of his finest Valorian shock troops to Kraggett 7, certain that overwhelming force would crush the Zephyl incursion. Quickly, the 1st Battalion landed in the valleys surrounding the facility and began their assault through the cave systems that led to the underground research complex. Quithrax watched the tactical displays from orbit, confident and relaxed. That confidence lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Zephyl had chosen their battlefield with terrifying intelligence. The caves were narrow, twisting passages where the Valorians' energy shields couldn't recharge properly because the mineral-rich rock absorbed and scattered the power feeds. The sophisticated sensor arrays that made Dominion soldiers nearly omniscient on open battlefields were jammed by the same minerals, reducing the enhanced warriors to stumbling through darkness with visual sensors that couldn't penetrate the gloom. And the Zephyl, evolved for tunnel warfare, moved through the passages like water flowing through cracks in stone. The 1st Battalion was slaughtered to the last soldier. Quithrax, his pride wounded and his anger rising, sent in the 2nd Battalion with heavier weapons and different tactics. They tried to blast their way through the rock itself, using plasma cutters to create new passages that bypassed the Zephyl ambush points. The Zephyl simply collapsed those tunnels, burying the Valorians alive under thousands of tons of stone. The 2nd Battalion died, screaming in the darkness. 3rd Battalion refused to enter the cave. Scothrax threatened them with courts-martial and execution for cowardice. But their commander, a veteran of 50 campaigns, stood firm. War Marshal, sending more soldiers into that death trap isn't tactics, it's murder, the commander said. Over the secure channel, we need a different approach. Cathrax wanted to argue, but he knew the commander was right. 3 battalions, over 2,000 of the Dominion's finest warriors had been destroyed. In less than a weekend, the facility's automated self-destruct sequence had been activated, giving them only 9 days before the entire complex and the quantum encryption matrix were vaporized. To prevent Zephyl capture, the War Marshal convened an emergency council session, broadcasting his request for assistance to every Dominion military command. Surely, someone had experience with this kind of close quarters combat in hostile terrain. The responses were uniformly negative. The Krell had orbital bombardment capabilities, but that would destroy the facility. The Thaxians specialized in naval warfare. Proxima had advanced AI combat drones, but those required line-of-sight control that the caves made impossible. The council debated increasingly desperate options. Ambassador David Chen sat in the human delegation section and listened with growing realization. He knew the Dominion species were all advanced, all powerful, all accustomed to fighting wars with overwhelming technological superiority, but none of them had experience fighting when technology failed. None of them had trained for combat in conditions that stripped away every advantage except skill and determination. Of them, except humanity. Chen waited until the council reached a lull in their increasingly futile discussion, then activated his microphone. Honorable council members, Earth would like to offer assistance. The chamber fell silent. Cathrax turned his glowing amber eyes toward the human ambassador, his expression unreadable. Ambassador Chen, I appreciate the gesture, but this situation requires military expertise beyond what Earth possesses. Chen interrupted smoothly. War Marshal, forgive my bluntness, but you're facing a situation where superior technology is useless. The Zephyl have negated every advantage your soldiers possess, which is precisely why sending humans would be suicide. Kethrak snapped. Your soldiers are less augmented, less equipped, and less experienced with galactic warfare than my Valorians. True. Chen agreed, but my soldiers have something yours lack: experience fighting without technological superiority. Council Speaker Malthus leaned forward, his 6 eyes focusing on Chen with interest. Explain. Chen took a breath and chose his words carefully. For thousands of years, humanity has fought wars in jungles where sensors don't work, in mountains where communication fails, in cities where every building is a fortress and every civilian a potential enemy. We've learned to operate when technology fails, when overwhelming force is impossible, when the only advantages are skill and cunning. Poetry, Kethrak said dismissively, but poetry doesn't win battles. No. Chen agreed, but soldiers trained for exactly this kind of operation, might soldiers who specialize in infiltration, who train to operate in hostile territory without support, who are experts at turning environmental disadvantages into tactical advantages. The council members exchanged glances, some skeptical, some curious. You're suggesting we send human special forces? Malthus asked. I'm suggesting you allow a small team of specialists to attempt what large-scale military operations have failed to accomplish. Chen said. If they fail, you've lost nothing. You were going to lose the facility anyway, but if they succeed, you save the quantum encryption matrix and thousands of future lives. Kethrax wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him that primitive, human soldiers would die just as quickly as his enhanced Valorians, but he was also a practical commander who understood when pride had to yield to necessity. One team, he said finally, 12 soldiers, no more if they fail. I want no part of explaining to the Dominion why I sent more humans to their deaths. Chen nodded and immediately opened a secure channel to Earth. The message reached London within seconds, bouncing through quantum relays to MI6 headquarters, where Colonel Sarah Dunn Mitchell had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity for 6 months. She read the request twice to make sure she understood it correctly, then smiled. Get me Hereford, she told her assistant. Tell them we need a squadron full combat load. Insertion ready within 12 hours at the Special Air Service base in Hereford, England. Alarms sounded. Men who had been training, resting, or going about their daily routines dropped everything and headed to the briefing room. Captain James Morrison, Calcine Ghost, stood at the front and waited for his team to settle. 12 men, the best of the best, operators who had survived selection and training that broke most candidates. Gentlemen, Morrison said quietly, we've been invited to show the galaxy what the SAS can do. Try not to embarrass the species. The men grinned. They had no idea what they were walking into, but they were ready anyway. The Dominion carrier that picked up the SAS team from Earth was a vessel designed to transport 3,000 soldiers and their equipment across the galaxy in perfect comfort. The 12 humans occupied a corner of the cargo bay that had been hastily converted into temporary quarters, their gear piled around them in organized chaos that would have horrified any. Dominion Quartermaster Captain James Morrison stood at 6 feet tall, which made him feel like a child among the Valorian soldiers who towered over him by 2 feet or more. His team ranged from Sergeant Mike Bulldog Harrison, a stocky demolitions expert built like a tank, to Corporal Danny Spiderweb, a slight man who could climb anything and fit through spaces that seemed physically impossible. They were all veterans of multiple deployments, operators who had seen combat in a dozen different countries under conditions that ranged from Arctic ice to desert heat, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for the casual contempt they received from the Dominion soldiers. The Valorians walked past the human section of the cargo bay, making loud comments about the primitives and suicide volunteers. One particularly large warrior stopped to examine Morrison's rifle, a standard-issue assault weapon that had been modified for suppressed fire and fitted with optics designed for low light conditions. You're taking that? The Valorian asked, his translator rendering his tone as amused condescension. This shoots metal bullets. Yes, Morrison replied calmly. Kinetic projectiles. The Valorian laughed against Zephyl carapace, Armor, you might as well throw rocks. He held up his own weapon. A sleek plasma rifle that hummed with barely contained energy. This fire's superheated plasma at 0.6 light speed and can punch through reinforced titanium. Your primitive slugs will bounce off the first Zephyl you encounter. Morrison smiled politely. Probably mind if I see your weapon. The Valorian, surprised by the human's interest, handed over the plasma rifle. Morrison examined it carefully, noting the power cell, the cooling vents, the sophisticated targeting computer integrated into the stock. Beautiful engineering. Morrison said honestly, how long between shots? 0.8 seconds for the capacitors to recharge. And how loud is it when it fires? The Valorian blinked, confused by the question. Loud. It produces a discharge sound of approximately 140 decibels. Why does that matter? Morrison handed the rifle back. Just curious. Thank you for showing me. The Valorian walked away, shaking his massive head. Convinced the humans were doomed, Sergeant Harrison watched the exchange and grinned. Making friends, boss. Learning their capabilities, Morrison corrected, and their limitations, the trip to Kragath 7 took 3 days, during which Morrison and his team did what they always did before an operation. They prepared. They studied every scrap of intelligence the Dominion had on the facility. Memorizing floor plans and ventilation systems and power conduits, they reviewed drone footage of the Zephyl, learning how the insectoids moved, how they communicated, how they reacted to threats. They analyzed the geological surveys of the mountain range, noting mineral compositions and underground water sources and structural weaknesses, and they refused every offer of Dominion equipment where Marshal Kethrax himself came down to the cargo bay on the second day, his towering form making the space feel cramped. Captain Morrison, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. My quartermaster informs me you've rejected our combat suits, our weapons, and even our medical supplies. This seems unwise. Morrison stood and faced the war marshal, without flinching, with respect. Sir, we train with our equipment for thousands of hours. Switching to unfamiliar gear before a critical operation would be more dangerous than using what we know. Kethrax gestured at Morrison's rifle. You know that weapon will be ineffective against Zephyl armor. I know plasma weapons discharge at 140 decibels and require 0.8 seconds to recharge. Morrison replied, in close quarters combat in acoustic reflective cave systems. That's a disadvantage. Every shot announces your position and leaves you vulnerable for nearly a second. The war marshal's expression changed slightly. A hint of respect replacing the condescension. You've thought about this? We think about everything. Certs, why we're still alive? Kethrax studied the human for a long moment. 3 battalions of enhanced Valorian warriors are dead. Captain, what makes you think 12 unaugmented humans can succeed where they failed? Morrison met the war marshal's glowing eyes without hesitation, because they tried to fight the Zephyl using Dominion tactics and Dominion technology. We're going to fight them using terrain, patience, and the element of surprise. The element of surprise. Kethrax repeated slowly. The Zephyl know you're coming. The entire Dominion knows you're coming. There is no surprise. They know soldiers are coming. Morrison agreed. They don't know what kind. That's the surprise. The carrier reached Kragath 7 orbit 6 days before the facility's self-destruct sequence would activate. The planet below was a harsh world of gray stone and thin atmosphere, its surface carved by ancient rivers that had dried up millennia ago. The mountain range where the facility was hidden stretched across an entire continent, peaks rising 30,000 feet and valleys cutting equally deep into the Kruskuthrax. Called Morrison to the bridge for the final briefing. Dominion tacticians had prepared 3 different insertion plans, all involving dropships and heavy support. Morrison rejected them all. We'll halo jump, he said. Simply. The Dominion officers stared at him in confusion. High altitude, low opening, Morrison explained. Drop us from the upper atmosphere during the nightside pass wheel freefall until we're below the Zephyl sensor threshold. Then deploy our chutes and land 15 kilometers from the facility. That's suicide. One of the Valorian commanders protested. The atmospheric entry alone will kill you. We've done it before, Morrison said calmly. Not from this altitude. Not into this terrain. not with these weather conditions. Morrison smiled. Then this will be a new experience. We'll insert in 6 hours. The SAS team prepared in silence. Each man going through rituals refined over years of operations. They checked their weapons 3 times, verified their navigation equipment, and reviewed the routes one final time. Corporal Webb approached Morrison as they suited up. "Boss, they think we're crazy. They are correct." Morrison replied, "But we're also capable. There's a difference between crazy and stupid." The team gathered in the drop bay as Cragith 7's dark side rotated into position below through the observation ports. They could see storms raging across the atmosphere, lightning illuminating clouds that churned like boiling water. "That's our weather window," Morrison said. Lovely. The bay doors opened, and the thin atmosphere of the upper stratosphere howled into the space one by one. The 12 SAS operators stepped to the edge, and Jumpacuthrax watched from the bridge, his tactical displays showing 12 tiny signatures falling through the storm toward the surface. "They're insane," muttered Redrex. His aide nodded. "Agreement. Shall I prepare body retrieval teams?" Kethrax almost said yes, then hesitated. He thought about Morrison's calm confidence, the way the human captain had analyzed Dominion weapons, not with envy, but with tactical assessment. "No," he said finally. "Just watch. I want to see what happens when humans stop caring about impossible odds." On the displays, the 12 signatures plummeted through the storm like falling stars. Then, at exactly the right moment, they dispersed, and 12 parachutes bloomed in the darkness. SAS had entered the battle. The landing was harder than any training jump Morrison had ever experienced. The winds caught his parachute and slammed him into the rocky ground with enough force to crack ribs if he hadn't rolled properly. Dispersing the impact across his shoulders and back, he cut away his chute, gathered his gear, and keyed his radio twice the signal that he was alive and operational. 11. Lix answered him in the darkness. The team assembled at the rally point within 20 minutes. Moving through the alien landscape with practiced efficiency, the gravity was higher than Earth standard, making every step feel like they were carrying extra weight. And the atmosphere was thin enough that breathing required conscious effort, but they had trained in mountains, in hostile environments, in conditions that tested human endurance to its limits. This was just one more challenge. Morrison checked his navigation tablet, a ruggedized device that used dead reckoning and terrain matching rather than relying on satellites or networks that could be intercepted 15 kilometers to the facility through mountain passes that would hide them from orbital sensors. They moved in a tactical formation that had been refined over decades of SAS operations, each man covering specific fields of fire, maintaining noise discipline that would have impressed a ghost sergeant. Harrison took point, his enhanced night vision goggles turning the darkness into shades of green behind him. Corporal Webb scanned for threats with the sixth sense that came from surviving too many ambushes. The rest of the team followed in staggered positions, weapons ready but fingers off triggers. Professionals who knew the difference between being prepared and being reckless. They covered the first 5 kilometers in 2 hours, moving at a pace that balanced speed with stealth. Twice, they encountered Zephel patrols and sectoid creatures, the size of large dogs that skittered across the rocks on 6 legs, their compound eyes scanning for threats. Both times the SAS team went to ground, becoming invisible in the shadows, letting the patrols pass within meters without ever knowing humans were there. Kethrax watched from orbit, his sensors tracking the human signatures as they moved through terrain. His own forces had declared impassable. How are they avoiding the Zephel sensors? He demanded. The Dominion tactical officer studied his displays with growing confusion. War Marshal, they're not avoiding the sensors, they're using them. Explain. The officer highlighted patterns on the screen. Zephel have deployed automated sensor nets throughout the region. Standard security doctrine, but the nets sweep in predictable patterns with gaps in coverage. The humans are timing their movements to slip through those gaps. Kethrax leaned forward, studying the patterns himself. Our forces never identified those gaps. Our forces never looked for them. Sir, they relied on superior technology to overwhelm the sensors the humans are treating. The sensors like a puzzle to solve rather than an obstacle to defeat. The War Marshal said nothing, but his expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. Though SAS team reached the facility perimeter 36 hours after insertion. All 12 men exhausted but operational, the facility entrance was a reinforced bunker set into the mountainside. Surrounded by defensive positions and automated weapons, system cephal warriors larger than the patrol drones, heavily armored and carrying biological weapons that could dissolve. Flesh guarded every approach. Morrison studied the defenses through his scope for 20 minutes, noting patrol patterns and shift changes and blind spots. Then he turned to his team and began sketching in the dirt maintenance tunnel here, he said quietly. Pointing to a ventilation shaft on the facility's eastern side, Dominion blueprints show it was sealed during construction, but the seal was standard Durocrete Bulldog. Can you cut through quietly? Harrison studied the distance and angles. Give me 30 minutes with thermal cutting paste, and I'll have us a door web. You're our smallest. You go through first and scout the interior. The slight corporal nodded. Looking for what, boss? Command center, guard rotations. In structural weaknesses, we're not here to fight our way in. We're here to ghost them. The plan was vintage, SAS patient. Methodical and relying on skill rather than firepower, while Harrison worked on the ventilation shaft. Using cutting paste that burned at controlled temperatures and produced minimal light, the rest of the team established overwatch positions. They watched Zephel patrols pass below their positions. Close enough to hear the clicking communication between the insectoids, close enough to smell the acidic secretions that marked their territory. Any conventional force would have opened fire. Tried to fight their way through the SAS, weighted Harrison's cutting paste, breached the seal with a soft hiss that was lost in the windweb, slithered through the narrow opening like his call sign suggested, disappearing into the facility's guts with nothing but a knife, a flashlight, and a radio for 2 hours. The team waited in absolute silence while Webb navigated the ventilation system, mapping the facility's interior through direct observation. His whispered reports painted a picture of the Zephel deployment 300 warriors throughout the complex, concentrated in the main corridors and chamber where the quantum encryption matrix was housed, but the ventilation system, designed by Dominion engineers who never imagined anyone would use it for infiltration, connected every section of the facility web, returned through the shaft, covered in dust and smelling of recycled air. They've turned the main chamber into a fortress, he reported, but they're guarding against frontal assault. Nobody's watching the vents, the maintenance crawlways, or the water pipes. Morrison nodded slowly. Because the Dominion forces tried to fight through the front door, they're expecting the same thing from us. So we don't use the front door, Harrison said with a grin. We use every other door they forgot existed. The infiltration began at midnight. Facility Time SAS team entered through the ventilation shaft in pairs, moving through the facility's infrastructure like blood flowing through veins. They traveled through spaces the Dominion engineers had designated as inaccessible to personnel, crawlways 18 inches wide, vertical shafts with no handholds, water pipes that required swimming through complete darkness for the heavily augmented Valorian soldiers. These spaces were genuinely impossible for humans who had trained in tunnels and sewers and crawl spaces. They were just another environment to Master. Morrison led the way, his compact frame perfect for the narrow passages. His breathing controlled to minimize sound. Behind him came 11 more ghosts, each one trusting the man in front, each one ready to fight if necessary, but hoping they wouldn't have. They reached the first Zephel guard post at 0100 hours through a ventilation grate. Morrison could see 3 Zephel warriors standing watch over a corridor junction, their weapons held ready, their compound eyes scanning for threats they expected to come from the main passages. Morrison hand signaled to Webb and Harrison. The corporal removed the grate in complete silence, years of practice making his movements invisible. Harrison passed Morrison a suppressed pistol loaded with subsonic ammunition that would barely whisper when fired. Morrison took aim through the opening, controlled his breathing, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The suppressed pistol coughed quietly. 3 sounds that could have been mistaken for someone dropping equipment. 3 Zephel warriors collapsed with precision shots to their neural clusters. Dead before they hit the ground, the team moved through the grate and into the corridor, weapons up. Covering every angle, they dragged the bodies into a side room and continued deeper into the facility over the next 6 hours. They moved through the complex like shadows, eliminating isolated guards with knives and suppressed weapons, always staying ahead of the Zephyl response when a patrol discovered bodies. The SAS team was already 3 corridors away. Moving through passages the Zephyl didn't know existed, they identified the Zephyl command node through careful observation, a chamber where larger warriors with more sophisticated biological modifications gathered to coordinate the hive's defense. Morrison studied the chamber through another ventilation grate and began planning the strike that would end the Operation Bulldog. "I need shape charges here, here, and here," he said, pointing to structural support. "Spider, you and I are going through that vent when we're in position. We signal, and Bulldog brings down the supports that creates chaos and blocks reinforcements, and then," Webb asked, "then we kill everything in that room very quickly and very quietly." The team moved into position. With the precision of a Swiss watch, Harrison placed his charges with the delicacy of a surgeon. Using minimal explosive to achieve maximum structural effect, Morrison and Webb crawled through a vent that opened above the command chamber, positioned directly over the Zephyl commanders at exactly 0700 hours. Morrison gave the signal. Harrison detonated his charges. The support columns buckled and corridors collapsed, cutting off the command chamber from reinforcements and creating a thunderous noise that drowned out all other sound. Morrison and Webb dropped through the vent, opening into the chamber below. What happened next took 11 seconds of controlled violence that the Dominion sensors barely registered. Morrison and Webb moved through the Zephyl commanders like death incarnate, suppressed weapons firing, knives flashing, every movement economical and lethal. The river system that carried the SAS team away from the facility was ice cold. It moved fast enough to break bones if you hit the rocks wrong. Morrison led his team through the underground waterways using a waterproof map and sheer determination. Each man linked to the next by safety lines to prevent anyone from being swept away and lost in the darkness. They swam through passages barely wide enough for their bodies, held their breath through sections that were completely submerged, and endured water temperatures that would have killed an unprotected human through hypothermia in less than an hour there. Survival suits helped but weren't perfect by the time they emerged from the river system. 12 kilometers downstream, all 12 men were shaking from cold and exhaustion, but they were enlivened. They had the Matrix. Morrison checked his navigation one final time and set a course for the extraction point, a plateau that Dominion shuttles could reach without entering the sensor net still controlled by the Zephyl forces behind them. The facility was in chaos. The Zephyl had discovered their dead commanders and were tearing through the complex trying to find the infiltrators. But the humans had vanished like smoke. Hundreds of insectoid warriors flooded into the tunnels and passages, searching desperately for enemies who were already kilometers away and moving farther with every minute. Techathrax watched it all from orbit, his tactical displays showing a situation that shouldn't have been possible. 12 human signatures, moving steadily toward the extraction point through terrain his geological experts had classified as impassably seaful forces numbering in the hundreds, searching in the completely wrong direction, and the quantum encryption matrix, the device that 3 Dominion battalions had died trying to protect. Secured and heading for recovery, send the extraction shuttle, he ordered quietly, and prepare the medical bay. Those humans are going to need treatment for hypothermia and exhaustion. The shuttle pilot who drew the assignment was a Valorian named Kresh, who had lost friends in the first battalion assault. He approached the extraction point, expecting to find corpses or perhaps a handful of survivors who had somehow escaped the Zephyl slaughter. Instead, he found 12 humans standing in tactical formation, weapons ready, looking cold and wet and exhausted but very much alive. Morrison was the first one aboard. Water still dripping from his gear, he handed the matrix to Kresh without ceremony. 1 quantum encryption matrix. Recovered and secured. We'll take that medical attention now, if it's available. Kresh stared at the human, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had expected to find. You're all alive. All 12, Morrison confirmed, disappointed. No, Kresh said honestly. Amazed, the shuttle ride back to the carrier was quiet. The SAS team sat in their seats, finally allowing themselves to relax now that the mission was complete. Harrison was already asleep, his head tilted back and soft snores escaping despite the shuttle's engine noise. Webb was cleaning his weapons with the obsessive care that all good soldiers showed their equipment. Morrison stared out the viewport at the planet below, thinking about the Zephyl warriors still searching for ghosts that had already escaped when the shuttle docked with the carrier. Kethrax himself was waiting in the batha. War Marshal stood at attention as the SAS team disembarked, his towering form a stark contrast to the shorter humans who filed past him. Morrison stopped and offered a salute. Kethrax returned it with precision. Captain Morrison, the War Marshal said, formally on behalf of the Galactic Dominion, I thank you and your team for completing a mission that many believed impossible. You have saved countless lives and prevented a catastrophic security breach just doing our job. Sir, Morrison replied. Simplicath studied the human captain for a long moment. I owe you an apology. When I assessed Earth's military capabilities, I judged based on technology and augmentation. I failed to account for skill, training, and warrior spirit. Technology is important, Morrison agreed, but it's not everything. Your soldiers are impressive, War Marshal, but they're trained to fight with overwhelming advantages. When those advantages are stripped away, they're vulnerable. And your soldiers we train for when everything goes wrong, when technology fails, when support is impossible. When the only thing left is your team and your skills, that's where humans excel. Kethrax nodded slowly. I see that now. How did 12 unaugmented humans succeed where thousands of my enhanced warriors failed? Morrison considered the question carefully. Your soldiers are weapons. Excellent weapons. But weapons nonetheless. They're designed, built, and deployed to fight in specific ways when the Zephyl negated those ways. Your soldiers had no other options, and your soldiers are different. My soldiers are warriors. Morrison said quietly. There's a difference. Weapon breaks when used outside its design. Parameters. A warrior adapts. The words hung in the air between them around the landing bay. Valorian soldiers who had mocked the humans just days earlier now watched with expressions of respect. Word had spread through the ship about what the SAS had accomplished, an impossible mission completed without a single casualty, against an enemy that had destroyed 3 elite battalions. It was the kind of achievement that changed minds and opinions. Kethrax gestured for Morrison to walk with him. They left the landing bay and headed toward the bridge, the War Marshal accommodating his stride to match the shorter human's pace. The Dominion Council will want a full report, Kethrax said, but before that, I have a question for you personally, not as a War Marshal, but as a warrior to another warrior. Ask, how did you know you would succeed? You jumped into a situation that had already killed thousands with nothing but primitive weapons and human determination. That's not tactics. That's faith. Where did that faith come from? Morrison thought about all the missions he had run, all the impossible situations that had somehow become possible through skill and teamwork and sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. I didn't know we would succeed, he admitted, but I knew we had a chance. The Zephyl negated your technological advantages, which meant the playing field was more level than it appeared in close-quarters combat in hostile terrain. With limited sensors, the side with better training and more experience, when no species in the galaxy has more experience fighting without technological superiority than humans, because you fought each other for thousands of years. Exactly. Every human conflict forced us to innovate, to adapt, to find advantages where none should exist. We learned to turn weakness into strength, to use terrain and timing and psychology as weapons. Your soldiers never needed to learn those lessons because they always had superior technology. Kethrax stopped at a viewport overlooking Kragath 7. That will change, he said firmly. The Dominion has relied too much on technological superiority. The Zephyl proved that. We need to learn what you know. You want training? I want advisors, human special forces operators to teach Dominion soldiers how to fight when technology fails, starting with my own Valorian shock troops. Morrison smiled. That can be arranged, but it won't be easy. Special operations Training breaks most candidates. My soldiers are strong physically. Absolutely, but this kind of training isn't about physical strength. It's about mental flexibility, creative problem solving, and the ability to operate under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Any of your enhanced warriors won't adapt easily. Then they'll fail, Kethrak said bluntly, and those who succeed will be better soldiers for it. When can we begin? The Dominion Council convened 3 days later to review the Krag 7 operation and discuss its implications. Ambassador Chen sat in the human delegation section and listened as Kethrax presented his after-action report. The War Marshal's assessment of human military capabilities had changed dramatically from his original evaluation where, before he had dismissed human soldiers as primitive and ineffective, he now praised their tactical flexibility and innovative approaches to warfare. He recommended immediate lifting of all restrictions on human military service and formally requested that Earth provide special operations training to Dominion forces. The vote was unanimous. Earth's provisional military restrictions were removed and replaced with a formal request for human military advisors. Over the following weeks, news of what the SAS had accomplished spread across the Dominion like wildfire. Humans with primitive weapons and no augmentation had succeeded where thousands of enhanced alien warriors had failed. It was the kind of story that captured imaginations and changed perceptions on Earth. The SAS team received a quiet debriefing and then returned to their regular duties. There were no parades, no public recognition. Special operations work demanded secrecy, and the operators preferred it that way. But among the Dominion species, humanity's reputation underwent a fundamental shift. The primitive species that had been relegated to support roles was suddenly recognized as possessing unique and valuable military expertise. For human advisors flooded in from a dozen different Dominion militaries, all wanting to learn the skills that had made the impossible mission possible. Morrison found himself assigned as the lead instructor for a new training program at the Dominion's primary military academy. On his first day, he stood before a class of 200 students from 8 different species, all of them enhanced with cybernetics and genetic modifications, all of them accustomed to technological superiority.